incubation temperature and the effect on broiler performance. You know, and if we look at, and we saw this yesterday just on different types of machines, you can see the multi-stage fixed racks. Again, you saw this slide yesterday. When we started measuring eggshell temperatures in the machines at transfer, so if you look at this machine, it's a Chickmaster multi-stage. You've got 12 different racks of trays, and we took 4 eggs from the tray, from the third tray down, the 8th tray down, and the 15th tray in a stack, and measured the eggshell temperature on the equator, or just below the equator of the egg. And what you can see, we did it on a young flock, and in the top here we saw about 8% of these eggs, which was over 101.5 degrees Fahrenheit, about 30% of them here, and about 60% here. But in the prime flock, you can see, this is the example, how some of these temperatures become quite high, 102 degrees. But look at the top trays. So out of 48 eggs, we had 18 eggs here where the eggshell temperature was over 101.5 degrees. In the middle section, almost, so 37.5%. In the middle, nearly 70%. And in the bottom of the machine, nearly 100% of the eggs were above that temperature. And in this front section, in the bottom here, some very high temperatures of 104s, 105s. If we put that into a contour graph like this, which is showing from the front of the machine to the back, the top and tray, middle and bottom positions, you can see a nice illustration that shows that basically in the top of the machine, the temperature is more we want to see, this 100 to 101 degrees. But the front section and also all the bottom machine is running quite warm. And this little part in the section at the front and the bottom here was extremely warm. So chick weight divided by the egg weight as a percentage, and also to see if we could place some of these chicks separately onto the broiler farm to see how they performed. So when we did this, what we saw was the hatch window. From this position, the normal, we saw first chicks hatching around about 30 to 34 hours before takeoff. These chicks from here, you can see at 43 hours before takeoff, already 10% was hatched. The chick yield from the top trays was around about normal, was about 67%. But from this area was very low, below 63%. When we took the chicks and placed them on the farms, so there's 31,000 chicks from the top trays, 7-day mortality was 1.05%. 7-day mortality was 25%. Now that's very extreme. But if you added these two together, you know, that included these chicks from here and the normal ones, the mortality would have been 1.1%. You wouldn't even recognize there was a problem. So this really took us on to doing some more extensive trials to look into temperature and seeing what was the impact on broiler performance going forward. So our goals was to evaluate the differences in incubation temperatures for Club 500, to evaluate the impact of eggshell temperatures which are outside the optimum on chick quality and on broiler performance, and to try and find incubation conditions that will give optimum broiler performance. We also wanted to challenge research work on unabsorbed yolks, white chicks, chick length, hatching times, naval quality. So when we conducted our trials, we were lucky enough to work with a hatchery in the Netherlands, where they had some small trial machines with 1 trolley machines, so with 4,800 eggs, and where we could, and they also had their normal operating machines with about 80,000 eggs. So their operating temperature, the machines were running at eggshell temperature 100 degrees Fahrenheit in their normal machines. What we set up for was to look at a low temperature and the eye temperature as a comparison against the normal. So we want to look at 98.5 degrees Fahrenheit for low temperature, and initially 101.5 degrees Fahrenheit for the eye temperature, which we did on the first trial. But on the subsequent trials, 2, 3, and 4, we did 102 degrees. So just to show you in the chart here what we did, all the machines were run for the first 7 days at the optimum temperature of 100 degrees. Then the low temperature, we dropped half a degree a day. So at day 10 to day 18, we ran at 98.5. The normal machines ran the same operating temperature, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And the eye temperature, we increased by 0.5 again a day. First trial was to 101.5, but the other ones was 102 degrees. These are the setters. It's a Hatch-Tech machines. And this is the trial machines. You see, it's just one trolley machine. It's got its own control panel here. And on both these machines, we have got probes that we can attach to certain eggs so we can monitor the eggshell temperature going throughout the incubation time. This box of tricks here is a unit which Hatch-Tech uses, and it can link up to your, so it's got many probes on it, so we could look at 2 machines here. But it can also link up to your phone and tell you what's going on in terms of temperature. And these machines are recording like every 9 minutes. This one's more frequent. You can set it up as low as you want. When we came to hatch window, we wanted to try to make sure we could take chicks off at different times and to record them. So you see all the boxes have got a barcode which tells us if, for instance, this is cob eye temperature, another one would be like CN, C normal, and CL for C low. But we could take chicks out which are hatching at certain, every 8 hours we check the hatch window, and we would tag these chicks and weigh them and follow them through to see what their weights was and how they performed individually after hatch. We kind of like summarized the table of what we did from our trials and identified for low temperature what we called early hatching chicks was ones which had less than 490 hours of incubation. The normal chicks were hatching between 494 and 502 hours, and the late hatching chicks were after 506 hours. And you can see that the eye temperature, that the chicks which were late was earlier than the early chicks from the low temperature. So temperature will affect your hatching times. When we look at the hatch results, you can see that low temperature is very negative for hatchability. So you can see here the optimum of 100 degrees gives us the best hatchability. If you want to get force chicks out, it's great. You just turn the temperature up. But if you do that, you can affect your quality. So when you look at the cull rates with low hatchability, also we saw the worst chick quality in cull rates. Best hatchability for temperature at the lowest cull rate. And although this is good hatchability, you can see that the seconds were increased also from this. And normally we could see this high temperature could be as high as the low temperature or even more. When we looked at the breakouts, which is analyzing where the losses were, we did these trials in trial 1 with a young flock, 34 weeks, and later on we used the same flock, so we monitored the age of the effect of these flocks going through the trials as well. You could see that the low temperature in the beginning was predominantly late deads. Well, actually, they weren't late deads, they were alive. They still didn't have enough incubation time. So what we realized in this part was because they all had the same incubation time, in trials 2, 3, and 4, the low temperature groups were given an extra 8 hours incubation time, and the eye temperatures were given 4 hours less. Then you started to see eye temperatures, we saw a little bit more early deads, or this is in the first, in the first 7 days here, but nothing really significant abnormal there. When we look at the hatch window, so we went in at every 8 hours, so like at 40 hours before takeoff, 32 hours, 24, 16, 8 hours, and at takeoff, we would count the chicks at each time. So we record by the different temperature profiles how many chicks are hatching. So you can see with the eye temperature profile, the hatch curve is skewed here to the left. They're hatching earlier, and the low profile is skewed here to the right. And some of these chicks are still hatching at 520 hours, which is very late. When we look at the average we counted the 3 trials in there, we had 4, but there was counting 3. You could see again what was the hatch curve of the eye temperature, the normal, and the low temperature. And you see the low temperature has a much more wider spread of hatch, which is going to affect those chicks more as well. We also looked at the navels and scored them into categories of 1 to 5 and 1 to 4, and you can see in the low temperatures and the eye temperatures, but we didn't see anything statistically significant here, because really this first trial was the effect of having those late chicks. So they did cold, they were late, so you had more open navels, but after that was not significant. We also looked at the gizzards, because a lot of people say, we know that gizzard erosion can be done from the mycotoxins in feed, but some people also say, is there an impact on eye temperatures in incubation or extended length, the chicks which have been too long in incubation? Again, when we looked at these different scenarios, we didn't find anything statistically significant which related to the temperatures, incubation temperatures. Chick length is something which one of the manufacturers uses a kind of quality tool, and as this manufacturer was helping us, we used their people to measure it, because it can be very subjective, because some people will try to be very careful of the leg and other people are almost trying to pull it off. So they look at the chick length. And what we saw in this is nothing which was really significant, except that the chick length seemed to be with higher temperature greater. But in fact, when we looked in our second and third trials, when we looked at the differentials of the early, late, and times, we can see that this is correlated to the hatching time. So as that chick hatches and it absorbs some of the nutrients from the yolk and from the egg, you can see that it is actually growing a little bit more. So again, nothing which was really statistically significant from our trials. When you look at weight loss, so when the chick hatches, from the time it pips from the shell to its takeoff, it's going to lose certain weight because it's absorbing the yolk as well. And what you could see was here, as you look at the 98.5, the low temperature group, the early chicks, when they hatched, weighed 44 grams. At takeoff, they weighed 40 grams, so they lost almost 4 grams or 10% of their body weight. From the same group, the late hatching chicks also weighed around about 44 grams. But by takeoff, they still weighed 42 grams, only lost about 5% of their body weight. So you're always going to get, in a normal hatch window, chicks hatching from the early chicks and the late chicks, something like about a 24 hours spread. So you're going to find that as a broiler manager, you're not going to find all the chicks going to be weighing 40 grams or 42 grams. What you should see is a little bit of variation, probably a couple of grams either side, due to early or late hatching. What you can see, though, is as you increase temperature, and this was probably higher here, but you can see the weight loss becomes greater when you have those chicks hatching early, and that is a potential for risk for dehydration. We also looked at the organs, looking at the heart, and when you look at the difference here, you can see there was no difference in the low temperature and the normal the ideal temperature, but the eye temperature shows that it was affected by, the heart size was affected by higher temperatures. Yolk absorption, you could see the low temperature had poor absorption of yolk because those chicks were fresh and they haven't had time because they're later hatching, they haven't absorbed the yolk as much. So the normal temperature, these chicks hatch earlier than the low temperature, and we've got good absorption rate. But the eye temperature, also, these chicks hatch earlier than the 100 degrees. But you see the absorption rate is not as good because sometimes the chick is utilizing its reserves to control temperature rather than absorbing that yolk. The intestine was, like we said, with the chick length, it seems to be that as the chicks hatched out, because that last hatching chicks next, and then the early hatching chicks in temperature, the earlier they hatch, the more they're absorbing the nutrients and growing. But the liver also similar to the heart. You see here that the low temperature has not absorbed any nutrients. The normal temperature has the best liver growth percentage, but again, we've been affected on eye temperatures on the growth of this, on the percentage of the liver growth. One of the main things that I'd like you to take home from this presentation is what we saw. The biggest impact we saw was a correlation on chick yield and its impact on mortality, and especially because these trials were taken really after 2010 with in Europe with antibiotic removal, and you saw an increase in 7-day mortalities in parent stock, and also we see it in broilers as well. But so what we could see is when we had low temperature, when we had like this is the reverse way around, high temperature, you end up that your weight loss is greater because those chicks hatch earlier, they're going to lose more weight. So they ended up with around about 65% chick yield. The 100-degree temperature, the ideal temperature range, gave us our optimum of about 67% chick yield. But those low temperatures, which chicks are hatched later, gave us higher chick weights, and so the chick yield was 69%. And that's the same for both graphs. But the first graph here shows a correlation of the chick yield to 7-day weights. So you can see that the high chick yield or lower temperatures was negative to 7-day weights because that chick is absorbing, it's relying on its yolk early on rather than feeding and eating. And also in 7-day mortality, the high chick yield gave us the most adverse mortality levels. The optimum with 67% gave us the best, and even the eye temperatures will give us the lowest chick yield was still a bit higher, but much better than this late hatching chicks. And that's because there's more yolk present and more susceptible to be having infection and bacterial infection, especially when they start feeding and eating at the farms. The bacteria can grow and end up then with a blowout in mortality at, say, day 2.5 to day 3. This is more data here, but when you got chick yield of 64, 66, 68%, as soon as you get above that 68%, you could see the 7-day weights, the 14-day weights, 21, 28, everything is starting to drop off once you get above that 69%. So in conclusions in the hatchery, we saw low eggshell temperatures give us higher cull rates. The lowest cull rates was from the optimum temperature of 100 degrees. We had the low temperatures gave us the worst hatchability. And chick length showed that hatching time is the biggest driver of chick length related to absorption and growth. Yolk is related to hatching times, but higher eggshell temperatures can impede absorption. And higher chick weight loss after emergence from the shell with higher temperatures, so we have to watch out that we don't get dehydration of chicks. So that was fine from the hatchery point of view, but we needed to make sure we were following these trials through to the broiler farms so we could see what the impact was on those chicks right the way through to slaughter. So we did this internal work in the hatchery at Largaway, and we had two internal broiler farms, and we had one farm where the broilers were placed in small pen facilities where there's several replications where we can better measure the differences in performance. So there was 238 pens, varying from 10 to 45 birds per pen. And then we had our other farm at Sims, which has got larger pens, roughly around about nearly 1,000 birds, and it's mimicking real world commercial conditions. So ideal house, underfloor eating, and our objective here was to improve chick quality and understand what are the influences of broiler performance or incubation on broiler performance. Excuse me. If we look at weight gain, you can see that in trial 1 and trial 2, in all the trials, the optimum temperature here of 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the incubators gave us the best body weights at each stage. So at day 4, 104 grams, or day 15, day 20, and in the end. What you can see from these charts is that low temperature is negative in the first up to about 21 days. But then what you also can see is, and especially on this next slide, is, so you take from 34 to 38, but after 21 days, we see that high temperature is negative for growth. It seems like as if the organs, the heart and that is impeded in that the ability for that bird to grow is the same as ideal conditions. When we look at mortality, the same scenario, and don't pay much attention to the mortality levels because we're looking at some small trials or bigger, pen sizes. It can make a difference. 1 chick or 5 chicks can make quite a significance to the mortality level. But when you have the ideal temperature, we saw the optimum results in broiler mortality. Low temperature, you see here in the beginning, is the main problem, but later on, not so, it's still high, but not as bad as the high temperature in the beginning. High temperature in the beginning is not so bad, but it is rapidly increasing post 21 days. And we've seen this on all our trials in the common correlation. So in conclusions to mortality, low eggshell temperature gives us the high 7-day mortality. And high eggshell temperatures give the highest mortality post 21 days of age. Excuse me. We also monitored gait score, so the way these birds were walking, and you saw that at 35 days we measured the birds, the gait was, and the low temperature was negative, the most negative for gait score on these trials. Heart attacks, as you'd expect, we saw the heart size impeded, that the high temperature gave us the most mortality as well. And if you looked at, excuse me, if you look here at the mortality, as we saw earlier on, you see low temperatures and high temperatures. Both of them can give an effect on your final mortality. The optimum temperature is where we're trying to control more. The same for feed conversion. This was looking at feed conversion from the This is the chicks which hatched early, so the eye temperature. You can see that the feed conversion is greater. Sorry, that's early chicks, yeah, and the low temperatures here, and the ideal is the lowest again. And that follows through how it affects the feed conversion at the end of the crop as well. So in conclusions for low temperatures, we saw weight gain in the first 21 days was negative. We saw the highest 7-day mortality. We saw the worst gait score. We saw that the art size was negatively affected at 6 days of age. And, you know, we didn't have room for all these slides here, but we also saw it was negative for carcass and breast meat yield at 39 days on males. When you look at the eye temperature, it is negative. We saw that 102 degrees was more negative than 101.5 degrees Fahrenheit. We saw weight gain was negative after 21 days of age. Feed conversion was higher at 2.1 kilos and 2.8 kilo males. We saw more heart attacks and a negative impact on intestinal weight at 6 days of age. And basically for the 100 degrees or the optimum, gave us all the positive results each time. So it was quite conclusive on what we saw from these trials, and I still think it's very relevant today in antibiotic-free environments. We did some follow-up trials because a lot of people look at mortality, but somehow it's knowing where was the mortality lost. So this is some work we did on our pedigree operation, and where we measured chicks, there was no impact on transport here because you can almost throw the chicks from the hatchery to the broiler house. So not that you would do that, but so there's no impact on transport effects on that. But what we did is we took chicks out and kept them separated from 36 hours before hatch, 24 hours, 12 hours, and then the chicks from the hatching in the last 12 hours. So you saw at 36 hours before takeoff, we almost had 20% of these chicks hatched, which is a bit early anyway. But from 24 to 36, we had 64%, 12 to 24 hours, 15, and in the last 12 hours, only 1.3% of the chicks hatched. As you'd expect, the early chicks hatch, they lose weight more. So what you see is the later chicks have a fresher weight, and this probably would have been a bit higher, but there's not many chicks here. So you can see that affects your chick yield, as you can see here. As we've seen in previous trials, the earlier hatching chicks, not so long as we don't have them too early and they start dehydrating, gave us the best 7-day weights. And when we look at the 7-day mortality, you can see that the late hatching chicks gave us the worst mortality. This is some work we've been working on with a customer recently, and you can see that we've been measuring the chick yield and the percentage weight loss. So the blue line is the weight loss in the incubator and these two farms, and the chick yield has been a bit variable on their measurements. What we started doing is measuring, palpating the abdomens of the chicks to feel for full bellies or solid bellies. And you can see as we started getting the weight loss greater and the moisture down to achieve that, we can see the effect that the number of full bellies is reducing. So we haven't got that excessive yolk present. And when you look at the 7-day mortalities, and okay, there's some kind of horror pictures in here, but that's not all down to the hatchery. We can see a nice trend here now where we're below 1% on these flocks on 7-day mortality. And we measured this between individual farms, but even you can see when you've got the houses mixed, you can see here we've got Great Hall and we've got Hampton Barns here together, and then all of a sudden you can see in some places when they come mixed, will have a bit of a blowout in mortality. It could be something like flushing or temperature, so it's not all the effect from the hatchery. But it goes to show exactly what we've done. This is a table we've done to summarize really what we see as the effect of temperature and how it can affect different criteria. So as you can see, hatchability, low temperature is not good. High temperature is okay, but it's not as good as the ideal range of 100 degrees to 101 degrees. And when you come to feed conversion, low temperature is good, this is very good, but this is very bad. So it's just a kind of a summary table which you can use. And we believe the key measurements to determine chick quality are really, again, the chick yield between 66 to 68% when we're delivering chicks within 6 to 8 hours of takeoff. We want to see eggshell temperatures at transfer between 100 to 101 degrees Fahrenheit. The cloaca temperatures need to be controlled consistent. We don't want to see panting and huddling, and they should be controlled between 40 to 40.6 degrees centigrade. Uniformity of chick weights, that's something we don't always have our control. And as I said, if we're our hatch window, we don't want those chicks too fresh, which goes against the grain of what people have always done before, trying to make chicks fresh for local farms, because too much yolk present, and if we have stress, which can bring on secondary infections like E. coli, bacilliosis, and then we expose them to feed and water, gets a multiplication of bacteria, and we see a blowout in mortality between day 2.5, day 3 to day 6. I'd like to thank these people who helped in all our trials, worked with us, and Hatchtech and Lagerway Hatchery and the Coop for the feed. And thank you very much.